What's going on, everybody? Matthew Monis here, and today we're back with another camera comparison. Today, we're comparing one of my favorite smartphone cameras, the Sony Xperia XZ3, against the iPhone XS. Which one has the better photos? Let's find out. So first up, we have a picture outside of New York. Both phones take such a great job of this photo. However, I do like the way the XZ3 looks better. It looks more natural. This is what it looked like when I was there. The iPhone XS tends to take a slightly warmer tone and bumps up the exposure ever so slightly. Besides that, dynamic range seems to be slightly better on the XZ3, but overall both pictures are very appealing. Now we're zoomed all the way in, and as you can see here, the iPhone XS does a better job in the distance with details. The brick on the side of the building is a lot more clean, it's more in focus, and it's definitely sharper. The XZ3, it looks a little bit washed out, it's not as clean. Especially true if you look at the picture. On the XZ3 around the left eye, it's completely black, whereas on the XS, you can actually see the shape of the eye. There's a lot more detail present. Next up, we have another outdoor shot of some graffiti, and I gotta say, I like the way the XZ3 looks better in this shot. The iPhone looks great too, but as you can see, again, it's taking a warmer tone, whereas the XZ3 has more dynamic range and it looks a lot more real to life. So again, we have another photo by both phones, and this is interesting. I do find the iPhone tends to bump up exposure ever so slightly, whereas on the XZ3, it tends to bump up the contrast ever so slightly. They both look absolutely awesome. If I had to pick one, I'd probably choose the XZ3. I like the way it looks, it's a lot more natural, but again, the iPhone tends to lean towards more warmer tones. So here's a flower shot on a sunny day, and I gotta say, the XZ3 looks much better. There's a lot more color, higher dynamic range, and this looks exactly how the flower looked when I was looking at it outside. The iPhone looks great too. There's lots of detail, the sharpness is on point, I like the way it blurred out the background perfectly, but the vibrancy is just not there compared to the XZ3. So here we have again another example of how the iPhone tends to warm up the picture, whereas on the XZ3 it looks a lot more natural. This is a great photo because again, the iPhone is bumping up the exposure ever so slightly, and the highlights are slightly blown out around the viewing machine where it looks a lot more clean on the XZ3. Again, another photo moments later from the previous one, but I do like the way the iPhone looks better in this one. It did also a better job of exposing the light at the top. It looks a little bit more blown out on the XZ3. They both look great. I think they both did a good job with exposure, but from a visual, subjective standpoint, I think the XS did a better job. So now it's time to talk about nighttime shots, and this is the building from the old Friends show. Right below it is the old Central Perk, and the iPhone XS again is leaning towards the warmer tones. However, it did do a better job with exposure, and there's a lot more detail in the shadows. Now the XZ3 is not bad at all, but I do think the iPhone XS did a better job at night here. The coloring though in the XZ3 is a lot more vibrant, and you do get a bit more dynamic range. However, the exposure is not as good. As you can see on the lamppost, it's a bit blown out. In this low light photo, the iPhone is trying really hard to use its algorithms to make the photo more appealing. That light source is tungsten. It shouldn't be white on the side of my face. Also, I noticed there's not that much ISO being bumped up. The iPhone instead is using a lot of aggressive noise reduction, and it's smoothing out my skin and the entire photo itself. Now, don't get me wrong, I think it's more of an appealing photo, but the XZ3 is actually more true to life. It's using ISO, it's bumping it all the way up, it's not changing the color of the light source, and in fact, if you look at the right side of my face, it's actually better exposed. For selfies, if you go with the XZ3, you have a wider lens, which means you can fit more into the frame. But I do like the way the picture looks on the XS better, or the XS better. My face looks a lot more natural, even though there's a lot of aggressive noise reduction happening to smooth out my skin. I don't have a pinhead. I find with wider lenses on the front-facing selfie, it makes your face look really obscure. So right now we're doing the front-facing camera test. I can't tell which one's better, but based on my devices, it looks like the Sony Xperia XZ3 has a slightly wider lens. This one is 13 megapixels, and the iPhone XS is rocking, I think, a 5 or a 7 megapixel front-facing camera. And finally, we have 4K video, and as you can see here, the colors, the sharpness, the smoothness, everything just looks so much better on the iPhone XS. The exposure, you name it. When it comes to video, the iPhone always does a really great job. Now, in all fairness, HDR is not on with the Sony phone. If you want to see HDR, I'll have to make a separate video because the video needs to be exported in HDR and you'll see the differences between both devices. But overall, regular 4K video is better on the iPhone XS. So that pretty much wraps up this camera comparison. I want to know your thoughts in the comments below. For me, I think it's pretty even when it comes to daytime shots. Nighttime shots, it's hit or miss. Overall, I think I'd rather have the iPhone XS. For selfies, iPhone XS. Overall, it really amazes me how good this camera is. I don't think it's the best camera, but it definitely deserves to be up there with the top 5. So anyways, that wraps up this camera comparison. Let me know your favorites in the comments below. If you have any questions about either of these devices, hit me up on Discord. If you want to see some behind the scenes, follow me on Instagram. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one.